I'm going to ask Professor Shin Sang-geun to step forward and make an introduction to our first plenary speaker.
Good morning. My name is Sang-geun Shin, and I'm teaching at Ewha Women's University. I'm one of the vice president, not president of KATE. It's my pleasure to introduce the first plenary speaker of this conference, Professor William Egginton. Professor Egginton is a professor of linguistics and English language at Brigham Young University, USA. He is an international authority on language planning and language policy, intercultural rhetoric, and forensic linguistics. Interesting. He has written and co-edited 6 books and has also published numerous research papers and book chapters. Today, he is going to talk about the current and future socio-political consequences of English language policies in Korea. Without further ado, will you please join me in welcoming Professor Egginton?
Hello, is that working? Yep. Okay, thank you for allowing me to come here, especially the various 15,000 presidents that are here. But I also want to thank, I understand that a good portion of my funding here came from the US Embassy, and so I'm very thankful to the US Embassy and of course President Trump. And so I will send him a Twitter tweet thanking him. 시작하기 전에 제가 한국말로 조금만 이야기하겠어요. 저의 한국의 인연은 1970년에 시작되었습니다. 1970년에 처음 한국에 와서 2년 동안 지냈습니다. 그때는 지금보다 한국말을 훨씬 더 잘생겼습니다. 그리고 그때는 지금보다 훨씬 더 잘생겼습니다. 머리카락 어디 가요? 다들 아시다시피 그때 당시의 한국은 지금과는 많이 달랐습니다. 1970년 어느 날 저는 많이 달랐어요. 그렇죠? 1970년에 어느 날 저는 이 가족을 만났고 이 할아버니와 친구가 되었습니다. 할아버니는 제가 한국 전쟁 이후에 당신의 유로운 삶을 이야기해 주었습니다. 이 할아버니는 특별한 저는 한국을 더 많이 알고 사랑하게 되었습니다. 오늘 제가 한국을 사랑하고 아끼는 마음이 여러분께 전해 주었으면 좋겠습니다. 감사합니다. I think I'm the only one that understood that, and so I'll just retranslate that. I came here first in 1970 and stayed for 2 years and acquired some Korean, which I have since forgotten a lot of. And but that experience, especially the family I met that I showed, and the grandmother that I was with, taught me to love Korea and love Koreans very much. When I think of how much Korea has changed from my memory in 1970 to what it is today, is just remarkable. And so I think many times I think Koreans feel insufficient or sort of not at ease, but please Koreans, be proud of what you have achieved. It's remarkable in the last 40 years. So thank you. When I give this kind of lecture, especially when I work with teachers, I talk a little bit about these kinds of things. Comfort zones. Comfort zones are where we feel comfortable. Growth zones are where we feel uncomfortable and we are growing, right? And so there is no growth in a comfort zone. There is no comfort in a growth zone. So today I'm going to say some things that maybe are a little uncomfortable for some folks, maybe not. But I hope that I can challenge and have you thinking about some things to do with the teaching of English in Korea. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that, so this is my maybe 5th time back to Korea. 3 years ago, I was a visiting professor at Gyeonghee University Global Campus in Suwon, and 2 of my students are here today. Where's Neil and Sonok? They're sitting together. They're my fan club. So, and it was a pleasure to come back. I thought I wanted to come back to bring my Korean back, to resurrect my Korean, but it continued to go downhill. So it's to do with age, I think. 할아버지예요. All right, so when I was here at Gyeonghee University, I taught a couple of graduate and undergraduate classes. And I taught about socio-linguistics, which is one of the things I do. And one of the students wrote this, which I think is very interesting. Let me read it. My grandfather told me a true story before he died about the necessity of language. In the Korean colonial period, when the Japanese ruled, my grandfather lived in a small village. There was one bridge that connected to the place where people could earn money. But several Japanese police officers stood there and let Koreans pass by the bridge only when they could speak Japanese. My grandfather, who has 7 children, learned Japanese so he could earn enough money and have a high status. He later became the principal of the major high school in the city. There was a language battlefield which required the survival of the fittest. These days, in Korea, English is my grandfather's Japanese, although not as intense. There is an English bridge in Korea, and to pass over it, we need good English. Now, I don't know if you agree with that. Let me ask you, how many of you feel that just that last sentence, there is an English bridge in Korea, and to pass over it, we need good English? How many people feel that? Put up your hands. Okay, 3 people agree with me. Thank you very much. We will have a very good time together. Now, maybe this is an exaggeration, but this is a student's perception, okay, of what's going on here. I also did a lot of surveys, and at this point, my plan is to, I zipped it up, but reach into my bag and pull out a whole bunch of papers of all the surveys I did with students, asking about the English language and their response to the English language. These were university students at Gyeonghee Taehak. By far, the most of them thought that acquiring English was a very difficult thing to do and something that was not perhaps as necessary as much as the system required of them. And so what I'd like to do is, as was mentioned, I do language planning. This is as I go through this, I taught something similar to this to teachers yesterday here at this university upstairs. And I had a series of discussion questions, because when I talk to teachers, teachers like to talk, and so I ask them discussion questions. This one, is English a language of oppression like Japanese was for Jungwon's father and grandfather? And so we could talk about that, but not now. Let me just stress here, though, that the past is the past, okay? That English is what we learn from the past, okay? A week from now, I'm going to, with my wife, I'm going to Ireland. And we're going to do family history in Ireland to see where my wife and my grandparents came from. So part of me is British and part of me is Irish. And the Irish and the British fought against each other for ever, right? So if I continue this fight, I am fighting with myself, right? And that's why I've lost my hair, maybe. But the point is that I'm not talking about the past, I'm talking about the present, but we can learn from the past. So let's talk a little bit about language planning and policy. Language planning is planned approaches to language-related problems, okay? And so quite often, there are really two kinds of language planning that occurs. This is an outline of what I'm going to do. Sometimes I will talk about what's here, sometimes I'll talk about something else. So this is just to keep me on track, okay? So language planning, there's really two kinds of language planning. There's the formal language plan, where people sit down and make a plan, okay? Then there's what people do, okay? The sort of informal language plan. And so we'll be talking about those two things today, the formal language plan and the informal language plan. But people recognized a number of years ago here in Korea that there was a problem, so-called, because English was this global language, and to get access to the latest information, all these studies have been done that shows if you think of the information storage and retrieval system, like a bank, okay? 90% of the world's new information is stored and retrieved in the English language, okay? So people said, hey, if Korea is going to move from third world into first world, then we need to invest heavily into access to the bank, access to the information storage bank and retrieval bank. And so we implemented in Korea a whole bunch of English language policies, planned policies, okay? So some folks there, where are we? Where is the blue house from here? Over there, like I said, okay? The folks over there decide something, they decide a policy, okay? Who implements that policy? Who does the policy? A language policy. The Ministry of Education, keep coming down. The teachers, right? You are the people who administer the language education policy of South Korea. So if it's a good policy, or no, if it's a bad policy, who gets the blame? The teachers. If it's a good policy, who gets the acclaim? The politicians, okay? Always the teachers lose, right? Oh, you're nodding. Yeah, you understand. Okay, so do you think it's important for teachers to know the policy and to think about the policy? One of the things I do, not for many years, it seemed like many years, I was on the board of TESOL, the International Association, and I was on the board, there were all these other language teachers. These days, I don't teach English. I do language policy. So I don't do classroom practice for teaching English. And yet I consider myself an ESL language expert, because I think about it at the bigger picture, the picture of policy, okay? Because that's where, in English we have the expression, that's where the rubber meets the road. The rubber meets the road. All right, so let's just break down the abstract that I had for here. In the name of globalization, South Korea and its people have invested heavily in an English-centric language in education policy because of globalization. In many ways, this policy is the formal policy is a top-down policy. By top-down, we mean the people over there, the politicians, decide something and they tell the people what to do. And the teachers implement that policy. Okay? What we know about language planning is that quite often, when there is a top-down language policy, the policy doesn't work. The policies that work are the policies that are bottom-up and top-down meeting. okay? The meeting of top-down and bottom-up. Quite often what happens is that when you have a top-down policy, especially an educational policy, you have, as I've got listed there, and by the way, a lot of this stuff came from our research that we have done, okay? Kim Sonok is my research assistant at Brigham Young University, and she did all this stuff. So if it's not accurate, talk to her. Okay. So we have top-down language policy, centralized curriculum, and lots of testing. Because the government, whenever they do something, want to have a sense of responsibility, right? Are we spending the money accurately? So what are we going to do? We're going to test students. If the students don't do well in the test, who gets the blame? Do the students get the blame? No. Teachers get the blame, right? See how central you are to the whole language policy. All right, so what's happened in Korea, I think, is that there has been a top-down policy. The policy gets implemented. And then you have this thing happening called unplanned language planning. That sounds a very strange thing, unplanned language planning. But unplanned language planning is when plans happen, when things happen that are not planned. So when the government enacted this English language plan, do you think they thought about Hagwons, about private schools? Do you think they thought that middle school and high school students would be studying English until 10 o'clock at night and then going home? Do you think they thought that there would be so much test anxiety, that kind of thing? No, they didn't think that. They didn't build that into the plan, but that's what's happened, okay? That's the unplanned part of the English language policy. So that now many employers require people who don't need English for their job to speak English. But they don't speak English at their job. So what's the purpose of English? Think about it. What's the purpose of English? I think, and our research tells us, not just mine, not just Kim Sonok's, but also the research that we've done with lots of other Koreans. Many Koreans, by the way, what we've noticed is they go to the United States and they do a PhD dissertation on language policy. But that dissertation never gets published. And so we study those dissertations. A common theme running through those dissertations is these things that we've been talking about, and that English becomes a status marker, okay? But in the process, English has lost its communicative purpose. It's just for status. If I achieve this level of test, I'm going to go to this university, a better university. This requires the parents to invest heavily into their child's education, right? This requires this allows for wealthy parents to invest heavily and not so wealthy parents to not invest as much, which creates social inequality with English. That's an unintended consequence of an English language plan, okay? So what we have is this unplanned bottom-up approach can be seen in the ways that parents and their children sacrifice valuable financial, social, and family resources in private English schools and other attempts to ensure successful English acquisition. When I taught at Kyunghee University, the second semester I was there, I had all these students, they all sat in the front row, and they were all students who had spent 3 or 4 years in the United States or Australia, somewhere like that. Their parents had sent them over, right? We have, what do we call that? Wild geese, okay? How can that be good? How can that be good for somebody to leave and go to another culture away from their parents, or for a family to be divided? That is an unintended consequence of an informal language policy or unplanned language policy. And as we continue, the maintenance and enhancement of social inequalities and a general sense of language. Oh, this is important. Well, let me go back to that one first. One of the ironies of all this with English that we're talking about is, and you'll excuse me, what time is it? I think I'll talk until 3 o'clock this afternoon. Is that okay? All right, good. Thank you. So a little tangent. One of the ironies with all of this is that we have all these anthropological linguists going all over the world and looking at the connection between language and culture. The connection between language and culture. So for example, in Navajo, a Native American language, in Navajo, the culture is very hierarchical, layered like this. And so there is God, man, woman, horse. And in Navajo, God can do something to man, man can do something to woman, woman and man and God can do things to the horse. Okay? That's in the culture. That culture gets into the language. So in Navajo, when you speak Navajo, you can say the man kicked the horse. But you cannot say the horse kicked the man. If you say the horse kicked the man, it's ungrammatical. Now sometimes horses kick men. How do you say that? You say the man allowed the horse to kick him. Okay? So there is a connection between language and culture. So culture finds its way into language. And each language and each culture has some very important, what we call master scripts, or themes that are in the language and in the culture. Think about the Korean language. What is a master script of the Korean language? A cultural value that is closely connected to the language. Is it not older people, younger people? Think of honorifics, right? Think of different vocabulary for older people, that kind of thing. All right? It's in the language. Is there a connection between, because all these anthropologists go around the world and they look at other languages, but they don't look at the English language. Is there a connection between the English language, the culture, the Anglo-American culture of the English language, and English grammar or English vocabulary? Is there a connection? Most linguists would say no. But Anna Wiesbecker, who is Polish, looked at the English language and she came up with some what we call master scripts for the English language. Let me give you a demonstration. If I want you to open that door, right? In Korean, I have more status than you. Okay? I got a tie, I'm older, I'm a professor. So I can just say, open the door, right? But in American English, I have to say, would you mind opening the door? Would you mind opening the door? What am I doing? When I say, would you mind opening the door, what am I doing? I'm being polite, but who is making, when I ask that person, would you mind opening the door, who is making the decision? He is. I'm giving him the opportunity to say yes or no. Right? Does that make sense? So there's so many things. They call them WH imperatives or WIMP imperatives, okay? There's so many things like that. One more example, and then I'll go on because I think we'll stay till 4 o'clock. I'm going to pick on you because you're fine with that? Okay. You know that tonight there's a party at 7 o'clock. 100% you know the party is at 7 o'clock, okay? I come to you and I say, what time does the party begin? Are you going to say 7 o'clock? Or what are you going to say? Native English speakers. In English. Are you going to say 7 o'clock? Or are you going to say, probably 7 o'clock? Or I think 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock. You're going to put in a softener there, okay? Why do you put the softener in? Because you don't want to appear above the other person, okay? So the point I'm trying to say is that English has some grammatical features that are built into the grammar that reflect Anglo-American culture, okay? So here, and the prime script is what we call personal autonomy, personal choice, okay? Personal choice. Would you mind opening the door? Personal choice. So here's the irony. In many places around the world, students are forced to study a language whose underlying culture is not forcing. That's ironic, don't you think? It's a little ironic. It's human nature, but it's ironic. Okay, very quickly. Here's the research question. In what ways can Korea's formal and informal language plans be adjusted so as to avoid the negative unintended consequences of the current plan? Those negative unintended consequences, status, family dissolution, stress, all that kind of things. Are there ways that this can be adjusted? And of course, what is your responsibility in that? We'll go through that very quickly. Okay, I need to very quickly go through this. One of the interesting questions is, when we talk about Korea's current English language plan, one of the first questions a language planner will ask is, what English? What English? Because in English, there are two Englishes. English, how many words does the English language have? Somebody say 500,000. Brilliant, you're very smart. Okay, English has 500,000 words, approximately, depending how you define a word. The next language with the most number of words, because English has the most number of words of all the languages. The next language with the most number of words is French, with 140,000. So English, 500,000, French, 140,000, and all these other languages, okay? How did this happen? Why is this language so big? One reason is because it's got two languages. English has two languages, okay? Let me give you an example. We don't have time. Many times I go through this with teachers and we talk about this for a long time. We don't have time. But you have a simple sentence like, I looked at the ball. I looked at the ball. Now, I'm an academic. When I write a paper, I cannot say, I looked at the ball. I have to use what we call Highcode language, okay? The Highcode language for ball is what? Sphere, but if I can say two words in the Highcode, it's better, so spherical object. Looked, observed. Observed is a verb. In the Highcode, we don't like using verbs if we can use a nominalized noun, nominalization. So we change the verb into a noun, observations. And all these other things, passive voice, etc., we go through, and so I looked at the ball becomes personal observations were conducted vis-a-vis a designated inflated spherical object. This is the Highcode. This is academic English. So which English, when we say, and they're totally different. I looked at the ball, historically, is Germanic English. Personal observations were conducted vis-a-vis a designated inflated object is all Latin, okay? So they are two separate, in many ways, they are two separate languages. Even native English speakers have trouble dealing with the two languages. Part for native English speakers, going to university, becoming a graduate student, finally, as a graduate student, you begin to be able to function at that level. Us professors who have been doing it such a long time, many of us don't know how to function at the regular level, right? But we do manage. Okay, so which English? Let me ask you, which English are you teaching in the Korea's language plan right now? I looked at the ball, or personal observations were conducted. Which English? What was that? Low? Which English are you testing? So you're teaching one language and testing another language. Unintended consequences, right? Of a plan that's not well constructed. Okay. Here's an example of this. We don't have time to go through it, but look at the top one is low, the bottom one is high. Often becomes in many instances, etc. I might put this in a paper and you can read the paper. All right. Which English do your students want to acquire? Which English? Low code or high code? Low code. Which English are you testing? High code. We already did this. So what's the purpose? Your students, now I'm going to ask these questions. I don't know if there's answers to this, but your students want low code communicative competence. To communicate to whom? Who are they going to talk to? How often do your students talk naturally in English to somebody? How often? Do you know? Do you know how often? Almost never. Freshman students. Thank you. See, one of my former students knows the answer. Exactly right. Hardly ever. Okay? So you're teaching for communication, but there's no communication. So I'm asking these questions to get you out of your comfort zone, right? This is not accusatory. I'm just asking some questions. All right. And then, here's what I think. Here's what I think is also happening. If we are teaching English for communicative purposes and there is no communication, okay, human beings are very smart and Koreans are very, very smart. So if I'm doing something that has no purpose, but I keep doing that thing, then I find some other reason to do that thing. Okay? Does that make sense what I just said? If I'm doing something that has no purpose, but I have to do it, then I find some other reason for doing that thing. We call that goal displacement. Goal displacement. We displace a goal. So what I think has happened in Korea is that we are making all of our students and all of our families do something that's purpose is fuzzy, not clear, so they create a clear purpose. And the clear purpose comes from the language plan, university examinations, SAT, social status, best university. So a huge emphasis is placed on English proficiency to get into the best universities. Is there any correlation between having high English to get into the best university and educational success? Has the research been done? I don't think it has in the Korean context. We couldn't find any. Okay? All right. So what happens with this system that we have now is that students have less than successful language proficiency outcomes. What time is it? Oi! 언제? Good night. When do I finish? Noon? Who's? Noon? Really? Noon tomorrow. All right, very, very quickly. These are the results of this that has occurred in Korea right now. So we have less than successful language proficiency outcomes. I'm going to say something that will make some of you sad, but I go to many places around the United States and Australia, and I teach teachers, ESL teachers, in intensive English programs. And I say to them, which group of students has the most difficulty learning English? How do you think they respond immediately? Koreans. Okay? Koreans. Koreans have the most difficulty. One of the unintended consequences of this system is that we have taught Korean students to think they are not good language learners. Okay? We have taught Korean students to think they are not good language learners. All right, I'm going to finish very quickly then. Oh, no, I can't. I can't leave this out. One reason we've done that is because we create high anxiety and low risk. The research says the optimal is mid-anxiety and high risk. What do I mean by that? I mean, in a classroom, I want to be able to make mistakes. That's risk. I want to say, okay, if I make a mistake, it's okay. But what happens if you make a mistake on a test? You're dead, okay? So in a test, you don't take any risks in a test culture. So we can talk about that in the thing. All right, last thing I want to talk about. So if people come to me and they say, all you've done is talk about how bad things are here, what is the solution? From a language planning point of view, a solution lies in following what we call formal language planning procedure. And you look at two things, language behavior and behavior toward language. So language behavior is acquisition, how you learn a language. Proficiency is how good your language is, of course, and use is how you use the language. And then behavior toward language is attitudes and motivations, okay? If you build a language plan on these principles, then the language plan is more likely to succeed. So, how do you find these things out? At the center of every language plan is what we call a socio-linguistic survey. You find out from your students how they acquire English. Sometimes you meet students who have acquired English very, very quickly and very well, sometimes not. You need to find out what are the variables, what are the factors. You need to find out what proficiency is really required to come into a university, what proficiency is really required to work at Samsung. And then, of course, language use. How do we use the language? Finishing off with attitudes and motivations. So, if President Trump were to talk to President Moon today, and if President Trump were to say, please put Professor Egginton in charge of language planning in Korea, and if President Moon were to say, okay, because President Trump, you and I are good friends, it's okay. So if I were in charge, I would immediately start working on developing a language plan that comes from the bottom and meets with the top. that at the bottom is built upon a language survey, right? A socio-linguistic survey. But there's one more thing I would do. And I don't know if this is possible, but this is the last thing I'm going to... Yeah, you're standing up. Throw something. Go talk to President Trump. Something else that's going on with our research in America and has been going on for such a long time is that so much of language development, Jim Cummins talks about this, so much of language development depends upon what's called common underlying proficiencies. Sorry, I had a senior moment. Common underlying proficiencies. Cognitive development. What institution creates the best cognitive development in society? What institution in society within children creates the best cognitive development? Home. Home. The family. And so we have... haven't got time to talk about this. But we have all of these studies that says home is where the best cognitive development occurs. Not just for little children, not just for toddlers, not just for elementary, all the way through to secondary. Home is where, home talk, talking at home, is where this occurs. What occurs in the home, in language interaction between parents and children, in Korean, if it occurs correctly, lays a foundation for the acquisition of English far better than if the children are not in the home. Most of the time, where are the children? After school, in the hagwons, okay? Where should they be? In the home. Interacting with their parents. When children interact with parents, cognition grows faster than anywhere else. Now, I understand there's all sorts of reasons in Korean culture why we have this tradition or this way where middle school kids are staying at the hagwon very late. But if President Trump talks to President Moon, makes me in charge of everything, then I would urge, because I cannot do it top-down, because top-down policies don't work, but I would educate people to say, home is very, very important. Right now, I feel that the policy is going through, go around. And going around creates a better policy. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. Since we are behind schedule, I think we can accommodate only one or two questions. Questions, comments from the floor? Please raise your hand. Can you just wait? Okay, microphone is.
안녕하세요. Sorry. I'm wondering if you are in charge of English education in Korea. What would you make a policy about staying home? How would you do that in a specific way?
I think I would take the emphasis on off, away from English language testing. So not so much emphasis on English language testing, not so much emphasis even on content testing. Many countries' educational policy, the students submit portfolios of their work during high school as the most important thing for university entrance. So it's continuing to go through the system, not the one-shot SAT, right? Not the one-shot. So I would reduce the emphasis on SATs, and particularly, since I'm a language person, English language person, reduce the emphasis of English in the SAT. So not give it so much importance. Same thing, SAT, TOEIC, those kind of things, okay? Move away from a testing culture into a communicative culture. So that's what I would do.
One more question? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering, you focused your entire speech on the policy being up to entry university, but my own observations at small and medium enterprises, that English is absolutely needed in the workplace. It's not needed daily, it's needed once a week, once a month, particularly through email. I'm wondering, in your solution, are you going to be looking at, would you look at companies as the end use rather than university as the end use? What's your idea here?
Yeah, remember when I put up the survey and said we look at, for language behavior, we look at proficiency, acquisition, and use. One would hope that when a survey is done, it would target employers just like you are focusing on, you are involved with, and it would say, okay, here's a type of English that employers need. How do they acquire this English? What kind of English? What can we do to help folks acquire that English? And maybe they acquire that English outside of the K-12 system. Maybe, and you're probably doing this right now, on the job English, that kind of thing, and supporting that. So using, possibly using what in the United States they used to call it, I don't know if they still do, the vocational ESL model, where you teach vocational ESL in that model. I think that that might work too. But that comes from the survey.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Before we wrap up this session, I would like to invite President Lee come up on the stage and present a small gift that Kate has prepared for as a token of gratitude. Egginton. 사인 한번 드리시죠. 괜찮으시겠어요?